Jeremy. Today's day 144 of reading Harry Potter and the Goblet. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Let's go. We are currently on page 5. Messes up. Put it away, Uncle Vernon snarled in Harry's ear. Now, before anyone sees. Get off me, Harry gasped. For a few seconds, they struggled, Harry pulling at his uncle's sausage-like fingers with his left hand, his right maintaining a firm grip on his raised wand. Then, as the pain in the top of Harry's head gave a particularly nasty throb, Uncle Vernon yelped and released Harry as though he'd received an electric shock. Some invisible force seemed to have surged through his nephew, making him impossible to hold. Panting, Harry fell forward over the hydrangea bush, straightened up and stared around. There was no sign of what had caused the loud cracking noise, but there were several faces peering through various nearby windows. Harry stuffed his wand hastily back into his jeans and tried to look innocent. Lovely evening, shouted Uncle Vernon, waving at Mrs. Number 7, who was glaring from behind her net curtains. Did you hear that cart backfire just now? Gave Petunia and me quite a turn. He continued to grin in a horrible, maniac way until all the curious neighbors had disappeared from their various windows. Then the grin became a grimace of rage as he beckoned Harry back toward him. Harry moved a few steps closer, taking care to stop just short of the point at which Uncle Vernon's outstretched hands could resume their strangling. What the devil do you mean by it, boy? Said Uncle Vernon in a croaky voice that trembled with fury. What do I mean by what? Said Harry coldly. He kept looking left and right up the street, still hoping to see the person who had made the cracking noise. Making a racket like a starting pistol right outside our... I didn't make that noise, said Harry firmly. Aunt Petunia's thin, horsey face now appeared beside Uncle Vernon's wide purple one. She looked livid. Why were you lurking under our window? Yes. Good point, Petunia. What were you doing under our window, boy? Listening to the news, said Harry in a resigned voice. His aunt and uncle exchanged looks of outrage. Listening to the news. Again? Well, it changes every day, you see, said Harry. Don't you be clever with me, boy. I want to know what you're really up to, and don't give me any more of this listening to the news tosh. You know perfectly well that your lot... Careful, Vernon, breathed Aunt Petunia, and Uncle Vernon lowered his voice so that Harry could barely hear him. That your lot don't get on our news. That's all you know, said Harry. The Dursleys goggled at him for a few seconds. Then Aunt Petunia said, You're a nasty little liar. What are those? She too lowered her voice so that Harry had to lip read the next word. Owls. Doing if they're not bringing you news? Aha, said Uncle Vernon in a triumphant whisper. Get out of that one, boy. As if we didn't know you get all your news from those pestilential birds. Harry hesitated for a moment. It cost him something to tell the truth this time, even though his aunt and uncle couldn't possibly know how bad Harry felt at admitting it. The owls aren't bringing me news, said Harry tonelessly. I don't believe it, said Aunt Petunia at once. No more do I, said Uncle Vernon forcefully. We know you're up to something funny, said Aunt Petunia. We're not that stupid, you know, said Uncle Vernon. Well, that's new to me, said Harry, his temper rising, and before the Dursleys could call him back, he had wheeled about, crossed the front lawn, stepped over the low garden wall, and was striding off up the street. He was in trouble, and he knew it. He would have to face his aunt and uncle later and pay the price for his rudeness, but he did not care very much just at the moment. He had much more pressing matters on his mind. Harry was sure that the cracking noise had been made by someone apparating or disapparating, which was exactly the sound Dobby the house elf made when he vanished into thin air. Was it possible that Dobby was here in Privet Drive? Could Dobby be following him right at this very moment? As this thought occurred, he wheeled around and stared down Privet Drive. But it appeared to be completely deserted again, and Harry was sure that Dobby did not know how to become invisible. He walked on, hardly aware of the route he was taking, for he had pounded these streets so often lately that his feet carried him to his favorite haunts automatically. Every few steps he glanced back over his shoulder. Someone magical had been near him as he lay among Aunt Petunia's dying begonias, and he was sure of it. Why hadn't they spoken to him? Why hadn't they made contact? Why were they hiding now? And then, as his feeling of frustration peaked, his certainty leaked away. Perhaps it hadn't been a magical sound after all. Perhaps he was so desperate for the tiniest sign of contact from the world to which he belonged that he was simply overreacting to perfectly ordinary noises. Could he be sure it hadn't been the sound of something breaking inside a neighbor's house? Harry felt a dull, sinking sensation in his stomach, and before he knew it, the feeling of hopelessness that had plagued him all summer rolled over him once again. Tomorrow morning he would be awoken by the alarm at 5 o'clock so that he could pay the owl that delivered the daily prophet. But was there any point in continuing to take it? Harry merely glanced at the front page before throwing it aside these days. When the idiots who ran the paper finally realized that Voldemort was back, it would be headlines news, and that was the only kind Harry cared about. If he was lucky, there would also be owls carrying letters from his best friends Ron and Hermione, though any expectation he had that their letters would bring him news had long since been dashed. We can't say much about you-know-who, obviously. We've been told not to say anything important, in case our letters go astray. We're quite busy, but I can't give you details here. There's a fair amount going on. We'll tell you everything when we see you. But when were they going to see him? Nobody seemed too bothered with the precise date. Hermione had scribbled, "I expect we'll be seeing you quite soon," inside his birthday card. But how soon was soon? As far as Harry could tell, all from the vague hints in their letters, Hermione and Ron were in the same place, presumably at Ron's parents' house. He could hardly bear to think of the pair of them having fun at the Burrow when he was stuck in Privet Drive. In fact, he was so angry at them that he had thrown both of their birthday presents of Honeydukes chocolates away unopened, though he had regretted this after eating the wilting salad Aunt Petunia had provided for dinner that night. And what were Ron and Hermione busy with? Why wasn't he, Harry, busy? Hadn't he proved himself capable of handling much more than they? Had they all forgotten what he had done? Hadn't it been he who had entered the graveyard and watched Cedric being murdered and been tied to the tombstone and nearly killed? Don't think about that, Harry told himself sternly for the 100th time that summer. It was bad enough that he kept revisiting the graveyard in his nightmares without dwelling on it in his walking moments, too. He turned a corner into Magnolia Crescent, halfway along past a narrow alleyway and down the side of a garage where he had first clapped eyes on his godfather Cyrus. At least seemed to be understanding how Harry was feeling. Admittedly, his letters were just as empty of proper news as Ron and Hermione's, but at least they contained words of caution and consolation instead of tantalizing hints. "I know this must be very frustrating for you. Keep your nose clean and everything will be okay. Be careful and don't do anything rash." Well, thought Harry as he crossed Magnolia Crescent, turned into Magnolia Road, and headed toward the darkening play park, he had by and large done as Cyrus advised. He had at least resisted the temptation to tie his trunk to his broomstick and set off for the Burrow by himself. In fact, Harry thought his behavior had been very good, considering how frustrated and angry he felt at being stuck in Privet Drive this long, reduced to hiding in flower beds in hopes of hearing something that might point to what Lord Voldemort was doing. Nevertheless, it was quite galling to be told not to be rash by a man who had served 12 years in the wizard prison, Azkaban, escaped, attempted to commit the murder he had been convicted for in the first place, then gone on the run with a stolen hippogriff. Harry vaulted over the locked park gates and set off across the parched grass. The park was as empty as the surrounding streets. When he reached his swings and sank on, the only one that Dudley and his friends had not yet managed to break, coiled one arm around the chains and stared moodily at the ground. He would not be able to hide in the Dursley's flower bed again. Tomorrow he would have to think of some fresh way of listening to the news. In the meantime, he had nothing to look forward but another restless, disturbed night, because even when he escaped the nightmares about Cedric, he had unsettling dreams about long, dark corridors, all finishing in dead ends and locked doors, which he supposed had something to do with the... Thank you, everyone. That's all for today. Bye. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to be